Good morning and welcome to NASA. Both to those of you here at headquarters in the auditorium and to the students and teachers watching online. We're excited to have you here today. I know those of you in the room had a long bus ride this morning, but I hope you're excited because we have a really great day planned for you here at NASA. So my name's Amber Strawn. I'm an astrophysicist here at NASA, and I use the Hubble Space Telescope to study how stars and black holes form in distant galaxies, which is pretty much the most amazing job in the world. Or I should probably say it's the most amazing job on the planet, because probably the most amazing job in the world would be leaving the planet and going into space. And I'm really excited to tell you that both of the speakers you're going to hear this morning have done just that. So first up this morning is the leader of NASA, Administrator Charlie Bolden. He has been to space 4 times, twice as a commander and twice as a pilot of the space shuttle. And he has a very strong connection to Hubble because he was the pilot of the mission that deployed Hubble into space in 1990. So please join me in welcoming Administrator Charlie Bolden.
Thanks a lot. It's good for me to be here. Really good for me to be here to welcome all of you. I think I'm going to spend a very little time talking to you, and I'm going to let you talk to me most of the time. John Grunsfeld is here. He's really the Hubble guy, the spacewalker who worked on Hubble 3 times. I'm just the one that delivered it. So, and when I delivered it, it wasn't exactly the way it was supposed to be. We later found out. So in order to get it where Amber could really get the most out of it, John had to go do some work on it. So thanks very much for coming. For those of you who are off in Pennsylvania looking by television or wherever you happen to be, welcome also. I had thought I'd do some slides with you, and I think I won't, because if I do that, then it detracts from the amount of time that you have to ask questions. So that's my first slide. See, I said I wasn't going to use them, so the guys said, okay, that must mean the first slide. So go to the second slide. That's my message. Work hard, study hard, don't be afraid of failure. Let's talk about the don't be afraid of failure part, because you hear the work hard, study hard part all the time. Basically what we mean is stretch yourselves. You know, do not be afraid of undertaking some task that you think you want to do. Dream big. Dream really, really big. I know you've talked to Mr. Scalzi, who really helped to form this organization and have all of you here. Rocco has talked to you about this before, overcoming adversity. That's why you're here, and that's why you learned the steps that you did, and that's what this program's all about. When we talk about don't be afraid of failure, if I give you my example, I never dreamed of being an astronaut. I grew up in Columbia, South Carolina, grew up in the segregated South, and it just wasn't something that was, you know, on my mind, becoming an astronaut. I knew what astronauts were, but no way in the world was I ever going to become one. I placed that artificial limitation on myself. Did not think about applying because I thought if I did, I'd be told no. And who wants to be told no? You know, not very many people want to be told no about anything. Some of you sometime decide that there are things you want to do and you say, well, I'm not going to do that because, oh, I'm a girl, or I'm too small, or I'm not the right sex or race or something else. Don't do that. Don't put that limitation on yourself. Next slide, real quick. I want to talk a little bit about how we happened to get here. That was a very famous meeting. It was President Richard Nixon and one of my predecessors, Jim Fletcher, as they were talking about an idea. And the idea was a new way to go to space. When they talked about 3 pieces of what was going to be called the Space Transportation System. John and I had an opportunity to participate on one piece of that system, which was the space shuttle. And so this was an early mock-up of the space shuttle. This was back in the 70s. And the space shuttle or the Space Transportation System is something that people had thought about all the way back in the 60s. In fact, as we were winding our way through the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs, people were thinking way ahead. They were thinking about how to get to Mars, even back then. Science fiction writers have been writing about going to Mars since we can even begin to imagine. And so what this was going to be, what the system was going to be, was 3 parts. A routine way to get to space, that was going to be the shuttle, to leave Earth and get to low Earth orbit, where we could build things like a space station, not the International Space Station, because that wasn't on anybody's mind at that time, but a space station and multiple stations. And then the station would be the second component, a place where we could operate, we could build things like John loves to talk about, and we'll probably talk to you about a little bit. We could build large aperture telescopes and the like, because it's too much weight sometimes to get away from Earth. So if you take it up in little pieces and then assemble it in space, you can do a lot more. And that was the second piece. The third piece was going to be just a vehicle that stayed out in space all the time, and you would use it to go from one station to another, maybe from a station back to lunar orbit and then down back to the surface of the moon. But eventually you'd be able to go to other planets, and with the ultimate planet being Mars. And if you look at where we are today, where NASA is today, we are seeking to put humans on Mars in the 2030s. So you're gonna hear us talk about, when you get out to Goddard this afternoon, you'll hear people talk about, a lot of the studies that we're doing about this planet called Mars. And it's where we think that humanity should be in your lifetime. And many of you are gonna be the ones that are gonna take us there. So all the way back when we were talking about the shuttle the very first time, we were really talking about exploration, deep space. And shuttle was going to be the enabling vehicle that was going to get us to low Earth orbit, our platform, or where the infrastructure would be that would allow us to go on into deep space. We find ourselves today doing the same thing. We're now depending on American industry. We now have two companies, SpaceX and Orbital Sciences, that provide a capability to routinely take cargo to the International Space Station. We now have an orbiting laboratory that we call the International Space Station. It's a little bit different than the way that President Nixon had been briefed or that anybody envisioned, because it's now a partnership among there are 5 different agencies, to include NASA, Roscosmos, the Russian Space Agency, the Japanese Space Agency, Canadian Space Agency, and then a huge organization called the European Space Agency that consists of 22 European nations. Not sure anybody ever thought we would be there, but that's the partnership. A collaboration among 20-plus nations of the world orbiting Earth about 250 miles above this planet. And even as we sit here and speak, some of you may know, some of you probably don't, there's 6 people that are on this International Space Station. They've been working there now for almost 14 years. Not the same 6, okay, because we rotate them every 6 months. So they go up, they spend 6 months in space, and then they come back down to Earth. Next year, we're going to send an American astronaut, Scott Kelly, and his Russian counterpart up, and they're going to spend a year orbiting Earth on the International Space Station. We are looking right now to select a company or multiple American companies that beginning in 2017 will begin to take crews to the International Space Station and other low Earth orbit points. And in the interim, we're building a vehicle that's going to allow us to send humans to deep space. So we're going to start with a mission to hopefully kind of coax an asteroid away from its path toward Earth and get it over toward the moon where it can enter lunar orbit. It'll give us a place where we can go and do some building blocks, if you will, like you talk about in the way that you approach life. This is a pretty ambitious effort that we're about to undertake. Are we afraid? No, we're really not. Can we fail? Yes. But, the challenge is to do this big, challenging thing and not fail. And so that's what we're trying to do. Once we get the asteroid in orbit around the moon, then we'll send humans there using 2 vehicles that we're trying to build right now, a heavy lift launch vehicle that will carry a module called Orion, a crew module, and that'll take our crews to this proving ground around the moon. And then eventually from there, once we develop the technologies and the techniques to operate in deep space, we'll move on to take humans to Mars. Eventually, one of these days, putting humans on the surface of Mars. You and some robots will do that. So that's our plan, and that's where we want to go. Now, what I want to do in about 10 minutes, I think Amber's going to give me 10 minutes. Is that what you're going to give me? Questions from you, and you can ask me anything. 2 rules. Rule number 1, you can ask a question anytime you want to. Rule number 2, there's no dumb question. If there is something you're thinking about, somebody else in this audience is probably thinking about the same thing. So how about some questions from you? I don't think we have a way to take questions from folk back in Pennsylvania, but you got to ask, think of what your classmates back in Pennsylvania would be wanting to ask. So where are you from? Williamsburg, okay. Waynesburg. Is everybody from Waynesburg? No. Where are you from? Mapletown. Okay, I asked 2 questions. You ask me 1. Who's got a question? Who's the first person? Yes. Oh, mics are coming. And go to the next slide while we're doing that. I may have something else I like while we're doing. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Go ahead. Ask your question.
Hi, I'm Rachel Elsenheimer from Margaret Bell Miller Middle School in Waynesburg, Pennsylvania. When you first aspired to be an astronaut, who helped you achieve that goal?
Oh, when I first aspired to be an astronaut, the person who really encouraged me is the late, great Dr. Ron McNair. And Ron, like me, was also an African-American who grew up in South Carolina, except I grew up in the capital city, Columbia, which was a pretty big city, the home of the Gamecocks, the Fighting Gamecocks. I'm a USC alum, but the other USC from the left coast, which causes a lot of trouble every once in a while. But the University of South Carolina is where my hometown is. Ron McNair grew up in a little bitty city called Lake City, South Carolina. The big difference between Ron and me was Ron wasn't afraid. Ron decided as a kid that he was going to become an astronaut. Taught himself calculus, taught himself physics and chemistry, went to North Carolina A&T, historically black college, was an honor graduate, went to MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and came out with a PhD in laser physics and became one of the world's foremost laser physicists. Ron also had some other habits or hobbies. He happened to be a very accomplished jazz musician, so he could have been a professional saxophonist had he chosen to. He was a 5th-degree black belt, and I chose a path that took me to the Naval Academy, into the Marine Corps, off to be a test pilot, and I met Ron McNair the year after he had been selected as an astronaut, and he told me about life as an astronaut, and then he asked me before he left to go back to Houston, Texas, said, "Are you going to apply to be an astronaut?" I said, "Not on your life." And he said, "Why not?" I said, "They never picked me." Once again, I put this limitation on myself. And he looked at me and he said, "That is the dumbest thing I ever heard." He said, "How do you know? How do you know they won't pick you if you don't ask?" And so Ron kind of embarrassed me into applying for the space shuttle program, and that's how I happened to do it. So Ron was my inspiration. My mom and dad growing up, my mother and father were both educators. My mother was a librarian, had been my junior high school, middle school librarian. I was a library assistant for her. And my father was a high school football coach and teacher, and I had played football for him, not very well, but I was a quarterback on his football team. So the 2 of them also inspired me to do that. Okay? Yes. Next slide. That's just an awesome picture of shuttle. Next slide. Go.
My name is Makati Denton from Margaret Miller Middle School in Waynesburg, Pennsylvania. How did you overcome the obstacle with the Hubble Telescope not working at first?
I'm going to let John give you all the data on what he did, okay? But that was Hubble right after we released it. Now, this is mine, okay? That looks pretty good, doesn't it? It was hard to get to this point. This was the way everything was supposed to work on deploy day. We woke up, we got ready to deploy Hubble, we lifted it out of the payload bay. That was supposed to be really easy, and we ended up facing adversity right away because the mechanical arm, you can see the remote manipulator system, that mechanical robot arm, it was supposed to just lift Hubble straight out of the payload bay. When we started lifting, because Hubble weighed 25,000 pounds, a little bit more, and it started moving around in ways that we hadn't seen in the simulator. So instead of taking about 15 minutes to lift Hubble out of the payload bay, it took us a couple of hours because I had to talk to Dr. Steve Hawley, who was actually operating the arm, and I had to read numbers to him, which were position, attitude, all kinds of stuff, so that he could keep Hubble balanced by moving individual joints at a time to get it out. So that was the first piece of adversity we had to overcome. We finally got it out. See the gold things? Those are solar arrays. We sent a command to send the solar arrays out, and first one went out, no problem. Sent the command to the second solar array, and got about 16 inches out and stopped. And so for the rest of that day, the ground folk out at the Goddard Space Flight Center, where you're getting ready to go this afternoon, and us on board, and people in Houston, Texas, started trying to figure out what was wrong. They finally figured out it was a software malfunction, nothing wrong with the hardware or anything. So they did a really quick change, something that you guys are accustomed to all the time. They made a 1 a 0, and all of a sudden the solar array went out. So it took us most of the day to get the solar array out, and then we were finally able to release Hubble at this particular time. So we overcame a lot of adversity. When we finally got away from Hubble and we were back on Earth, within the first few weeks, when the first image came in, a lot of smart people said, looks great. In fact, we discovered something that no one expected. We saw the star that we knew we wanted to see, and it turned out not to be just a star. It turned out to be a binary star, which was two that were really close together. That was a great discovery, what we call the first light image. But really, really smart people said, that's good, but that's not as good as it ought to be. So there's something wrong, and they came up with a real fancy term called a spherical aberration, which said that the mirrors, though they had been ground perfectly, they were slightly off in their dimensions around the outside. And so we began to work and think of how we could correct that. And we ended up doing something very simple. See what I wear? Glasses. We ended up putting a set of glasses on Hubble, and I'm going to let John tell you the rest of that story when he comes up. But that's the way we overcame adversity. We put glasses on it just like we do on a human being. Okay? And now, John will talk about the final mission to Hubble, which made it the absolute perfect observatory. It's not a telescope. It's called a telescope, but it's actually an observatory. It's got a number of different telescopes that make it up, okay? Next question, over here. Yes. Go to another one there for me. Another picture. Next one. Go ahead, ask your question.
My name is Brooke Duranko. I'm from Mapletown High School. With the challenges that young people face today, such as broken homes, addictions, and bullying, what personal choices can we make to sustain ourselves in the face of adversity and difficult challenges?
I would, let me just use some of you will recognize this crew. Anybody not recognize this crew? You probably don't. Good. You're too young. This is the Challenger crew, and they're very good friends of John and mine. 7 incredible human beings who, on a very, very, very cold January day, 28th of January, 1986, got aboard the shuttle Challenger, as I had done about, 18 days prior. I actually landed 10 days before they launched, landed on the 18th of January, and 10 days later, we all gathered together to watch them go off into space, and about 73 seconds into flight, vehicle disintegrated, and they were gone. Challenger was gone. These 7 crew members were gone. It would have been very easy for us to say, okay, let's quit. That's just too much. We can't do that. But everybody in the agency and around the country actually pulled together and said, look, that's not the way they would want it to be. They came here. They understood the risk. Just like I told you, don't be afraid of failure. They knew the risk. They understood it perfectly. And they would be really angry if we decided, okay, we're now going to quit. So we got together, we looked at the shuttle again to figure out, okay, what could we have done wrong? We understood what the problem was, took actions to repair it. Life's sort of like that. All of you are going to make mistakes as you go through life. The big thing is to say, okay, I made a mistake. How do I solve it? How do I remedy that mistake? And then try to recover from it. If you have a family member that's facing addiction, what do we try to do most times? We try to admit it, first of all, and then get them into treatment. And addictions are more than just addictions to drugs or alcohol. There are a lot of different addictions that are not really good for us as people. So I would say you gotta face the problem. You gotta admit that you have a problem, and then figure out some way that you're gonna get out of it. Every time I've failed in my life, and I've failed lots of times, I've generally sat back and said, okay, I'm going to go back in. There's something I didn't know. I wasn't smart enough. I wasn't informed enough. And so maybe you have to go back to school. Maybe you have to get some more education. And then you maybe have to go back and work harder. And then you go back and try it again. How many times do you try? Over and over and over and over again. As long as you think there's a chance, you should keep trying. You should never be afraid of failure. So I would offer that thought to you. Next slide. And then next question. Over there again.
My name is Kaylee Anto, and I'm from Mapletown Junior Senior High School. And my question is, what programs or steps does NASA have in place to help its employees face adversity and difficult challenges?
You know, we have a number of programs, everything from, some of the challenges we face are challenges of discrimination, harassment, and the like. We have an anti-harassment policy. We have anti-discrimination policies, but we also have ways that when someone has a problem, they can seek help, and we can either do counseling for the person plus the perpetrator, you know, the person who is doing the offending. We have what we call an employee activity association that helps people get medical treatment if there is a medical problem, or helps them to find funds if they have something like a fire in a home or something. So we have a pretty tight-knit family organization that helps to give sustenance, if you will, and support to each other, just like most other organizations. And I think trying to talk and make everyone feel like we are a family, which we really do believe we are. And we're a big family. We're a huge family. We have 17,000 plus NASA civil servants around the country, actually around the world, because we have people, even as we speak right now, in Moscow, Russia, who are working in the control center there to support the International Space Station. We have people in Tokyo, Japan, in Paris, France, in Germany, so they're all over the place. And we all try to pull together all the time. And then we have 40,000 plus contractors who are also a part of the NASA family. So I think it's our approach is that we're one big family, and we try to take care of each other when we have problems arise. Okay. This was the Columbia crew. Again, you know, just because you have to face adversity once doesn't mean it's never going to happen again. We thought we had done it once we solved the problem with Challenger, and then we came up 1st of January 2003, and we lost Columbia 16 minutes away from landing. Totally different kind of problem, if you will, but again, we had to face adversity, and we had to figure out how we're going to overcome it, and we did, and we got back. And then after that, we successfully flew the shuttle, a total of 30 years, 135 missions, and the last mission we flew, we like to say, was the cleanest of all. The vehicle was just perfect. So it was ready to go when it landed again. Next question. Was there one back there? Yes, right over here. Next slide.
Hi, I'm Sarah Chori from Mapletown Junior Senior High School, and my question is, what academic goals did you set for yourself after high school, and what obstacles did you have to overcome to achieve these goals?
Well, when I was in 7th grade, I saw a program on television called Men of Annapolis, and it was about life at the United States Naval Academy. And I fell in love with the uniform on a television program, and I wanted to wear that uniform. It also didn't help that the campus was beautiful, and there were all kinds of beautiful young ladies who would come down on the weekends. And I was a young man like most of these young men here, and so, you know, that had some influence on my desire. So I decided in 7th grade I wanted to go to the Naval Academy. I really worked very, very hard all the way through the rest of my junior high school time in high school to get an appointment to the Naval Academy. That was difficult, but managed to overcome that obstacle and did get an appointment to the Naval Academy. Went there, and I had studied lots of math and science to get prepared for it. Got there in the summer, plebe summer, found out that guess what? I've wanted to go to this place since 7th grade. I hate it. It was hard. The academics was hard. I called home, and I would tell my mom and dad my freshman year, I made a mistake. I want to come home. And my father would say one thing to me over and over and over every time I called: hang in there one more week. And so for 52 weeks, I hung in there one more week. I did pretty well in class because I had prepared myself very well in high school, but I just hated being there. But over time, I began to understand why I had gone. I had gone there because I wanted to get a commission in the naval service. Little did I know that I would end up getting a commission in the Marine Corps, because I had two things that I knew, only two things that I knew for certain when I graduated from high school. One was, no way in the world was I going to be a Marine, because Marines were crazy. And under no circumstances was I going to fly an airplane, because flying was inherently dangerous. So the only two things that I knew when I went to the Naval Academy. The Naval Academy is basically an engineering institution, so my training there was engineering oriented. I leaned toward electrical engineering. Managed to graduate. When it was time to graduate, I looked back on my prior 4 years, and I had a choice to make. What service do I go in, Marine Corps or Navy? And the one person who had impressed me over the 4 years was my very first company officer, my plebe year, my freshman year. He was a major in the Marine Corps, a young man, not very long back from Vietnam, an infantry officer by the name of Major John Riley Love. He was very much like my dad, really tough, but eminently fair. And so when it came time to graduate, I said, I want to be like him. And I decided I was going to be an infantry officer in the Marine Corps. Found out my wife did not like that. My mother, my father, nobody in my family liked that. Really dumb idea, they said, because there was this thing going on called Vietnam. This was a long time ago. And they were all deathly afraid that, I wouldn't survive. But I chose the Marine Corps. And so that's how I happened to come in the Marine Corps. Going through training as an officer, I found out I did not like crawling around in the mud. And in order to be an infantry officer, you had to like crawling around in the mud. So I looked for an alternative. Pensacola, Florida. White sandy beaches, nice airplanes, and my wife wanted to go to Pensacola. And I learned back then, as I have learned for 45 years now, she's usually right. And so we went to Pensacola, Florida. First time I took off in an airplane, I fell in love with it, and I've never looked back since. So, I studied there. I did well. Like I said, I majored in technical areas. So when I made the decision that I was going to apply for the space shuttle program, the way that Ron McNair had embarrassed me into doing, I had the prerequisites for that because you have to have a technical undergraduate background, and I had that by virtue of coming out of the Naval Academy. So without intending to do that, I had actually prepared myself for what would actually ultimately become part of my longest serving adult career, which was 14 years in the astronaut office, in the middle of my 34 years in the Marine Corps. So, question over where? There. Next slide. In fact, go all the way to the slide before the last. Don't go to the last slide. Go to the one just before the last slide. Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Kaylee Wagner
Hi,
from
Kaylee.
Mapletown Junior Senior High School. After such a successful space shuttle program, how does NASA evaluate themselves to build new dreams and goals?
Ooh, good question. How do we evaluate ourselves? Well, there are a number of ways we get evaluated. We are always looking inwardly, trying to figure out how well we're doing. This may not seem like a big deal to you, but we look at how our employees view us. We participate in something called an employee viewpoint survey, and it's sort of an introspective, a self-analysis of how you're doing. It's something that's sponsored by an organization here in D.C. called the Partnership for Public Service, and they go out every year and ask all federal agencies to have their employees grade themselves. And so for the last 3 years, when our employees have graded NASA, they've determined that they've graded us such that we ended up being the best place to work in government. So that's one way to look at how we're doing as a people organization. Since, as you know, John and I will talk to you about machines and rockets and telescopes and all that kind of stuff, but when you get right down to it, we're a people organization. And so our focus is on our people. We also constantly look at the programs and projects that we have to see if they're being effective. Before they go into operation, we constantly evaluate whether or not they're on schedule and on cost. John in science actually has a senior review council that looks at every project that's underway and determines, okay, it's doing well, but do we want to continue to fly it? Because some of his things we could fly forever, except if we fly them forever, it means we don't fly new stuff. So they are constantly looking at, and we have outside organizations that assess how we're doing or what we should do and make recommendations to us, things that are called decadal surveys that come from the National Research Council and really smart people outside NASA that determine how well we're doing or what they think we should be doing. This is going to be the last question for me because I got to go sit down. Go to my last slide if you can, please. Yes?
Hi, I'm Gabrielle Mollenberg from Mapletown High School. What early events, personal, academic, etc., occurred in your life that led you to dreams of becoming an astronaut?
Early events in my life, none, that led me to dreams of becoming an astronaut. Because as I said before, it is something about which I never dreamed. I'm not unusual. I don't know, John, 50-50. About half the people who become astronauts never dreamed of it. Many of us, because they did like I did. They just put limitations on themselves. You know, we didn't dream that far. I dreamed about doing a lot of things. I never dreamed of being an astronaut. So it was something that I grew into. I would say to all of you, set goals for yourselves right now, but don't say, I'm not going to listen to anything else. Have the courage to change your mind, especially when you go to college. You know, when you go to college, you're going to be set. This is the way you all are, your generation. You got it all made up. You know what you want to do, and you're going to do it no matter what. You may find when you get to college that, guess what? I don't like the subject matter that I'm studying. I really like this. I didn't even know this existed. That's kind of what happened to me. I never knew that I had a chance to be an astronaut until I talked to Ron McNair. It just was not in my, in my thinking. So I would say leave yourself some flexibility, but study, study, study. Get as much technical background as you can. If there's the remotest chance that you're going to want to do that, take all the math and science that you can. Make sure you got some foreign language in your hip pocket, because you're really going to need it in this day and age. And I would say do that. And last thing, let me leave you with this saying. It's from a young African boy by the name of Nkosi Johnson. And I use Nkosi's saying as sort of a guide for myself each day, because Nkosi is the ultimate example of someone overcoming adversity. He was born with AIDS. He was born in a small village called KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. His mother had AIDS because she had been infected by his father, and she knew she was going to die after Nkosi was born, or very shortly thereafter. So she found a young white woman by the name of Gail Johnson and asked Gail if she would raise Nkosi after she passed away. And Gail said she would, and so she raised Nkosi. He was a different child. Everybody who ever met him said they'd never seen anybody like him, because from the moment he could talk, he was always directing people on things that needed to be done to help other people. They said Nkosi never cried out in pain. He never complained about being sick, but he was always sick. His body was racked with the disease, with AIDS. But he and Gail traveled eventually all over the world, fighting, crusading against AIDS. Nkosi met an American writer by the name of Jim Wooten. And Jim Wooten, when he learned that he had met Nkosi once before, had come back and written a very small book called We Are All the Same, The Life of Nkosi Johnson. Jim Wooten came back to the U.S. and he got a message that said, hey, if you want to see Nkosi, you need to hustle, because he's about to die. And so Jim Wooten went all the way back to South Africa, sat by Nkosi's bedside. Nkosi was 12 years old. He weighed about 20 pounds, sores and pus all over and everything. And Nkosi was laying there and he was smiling. And Jim said he couldn't believe it. This black face with these beautiful white teeth, and Nkosi is telling people, we need to do this. We need to get this done. And Jim said, stop, Nkosi. He said, you're going to die. And he said, Nkosi looked up at him and he smiled and he said, yep. He said, but Nkosi, you could die today. He said, yep. He said, then I don't get it. Why are you don't cry out in pain. I know you're hurting. You have never asked for anything for yourself. All you've ever done is look out for other people. Why do you do that? He said, Nkosi looked up at him and smiled and told him this: do all you can with what you have, in the time that you have, in the place that you are. What you're learning in this program is as much about other people as it is about you. Think about what you can do to make the world better. Think about what you can do in the time that you have. Forget about yourself. Really, forget about yourself and think about what impact you can have on the lives of other people to make them better. And I think you'll find that you are much, much richer, and you'll feel much better about yourself. So thanks very much for letting me have an opportunity to talk to you, and enjoy yourselves, especially when you get out to Goddard. Thanks so very much. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Administrator Bolden. All right, so next up, our next speaker is Dr. John Grunsfeld. He also has a very strong connection to Hubble. He is both an astrophysicist and an astronaut, and he has been to space 5 times, and 3 of those missions were servicing the Hubble Space Telescope. So John and his team are responsible for keeping Hubble to be the amazing instrument that it still is today. And thanks to his hard work and NASA's hard work, Hubble just celebrated its 24th birthday in space just a couple weeks ago. So please join me in welcoming Dr. John Grunsfeld.
And welcome all of you to NASA headquarters. Really privileged to be here. Thanks, Charlie. Those were some great stories. Since you've been working on Hubble all of these many months, I thought I'd tell you a bit of a Hubble story. And my messages are a little bit different than Charlie's because I did want to be an astronaut from about the time I was 7 years old, 6 or 7 years old. And when I was growing up, I lived near the back of a grocery store. And so big trucks were always arriving at the grocery store and dropping off food and then leaving. And so when I was really little, thought I wanted to be a truck driver. And eventually I did get my truck driving license and drove a truck briefly, but that's a whole other story. But when I was about 7 years old, we were launching Gemini flights, the first rocket that had 2 people in it. And I looked at that and I thought that looked really cool. And the astronauts training and long hours in isolation and all kinds of hard stuff. And then they came back and they were big heroes. So I decided I wanted to be an astronaut. And my mom thought that was great. Because she wouldn't have to worry about me driving all the time on the roads. And there's no chance I would ever become an astronaut, but maybe I'd be inspired to learn math and science. And as it turns out, I did study a lot of math and science, and I did become an astronaut, and my mom was really scared when I went to space. But I want to talk a little bit about our mission here at NASA and how I look at it. And as I see it, our mission here at NASA is to innovate, and we do that through technology and in fact all of our work, to explore, to go out and try and do new things. And when you go out and you explore, you discover new things. And that, for me, is one of the greatest riches that any individual can do or any team, is to discover new things. And when we do discover new things and we share that with the world, I hope we inspire the world. And that's, in fact, one of the returns that NASA provides to the rest of the world, is the inspiration of exploring space. I thought I'd show you a picture of where you came from very early this morning. And somewhere in this picture of Pennsylvania is where you live, depending upon where you live. And that broad sweep through the middle are the Appalachian Mountains. I also wanted to talk a little bit about why we study astronomy. And when I was growing up, I studied a lot of physics, read a lot of physics textbooks. My parents thought I was a little weird. My sister thought I was really weird because we'd go on vacations to places like Pensacola, Florida, with beautiful beaches. And my sister would be out getting a suntan on the beach. My parents would be out playing tennis or something like that. And I'd be sitting in the shade in a balcony somewhere reading a physics textbook. And so, yeah, I was a little bit nerdy. But I've just found it fascinating. And so as I was in high school learning science, helping science teachers and things like that, thinking about going to college, I was thinking, wow, this is really, a very, high, important thing to do, is to learn physics and discover new things and maybe win a Nobel Prize. And I got to college and started working, doing science, doing physics, doing astronomy, and I discovered that in spite of the view we have of Nobel laureates sitting up on platforms and everybody applauding, that's not what it's all about. What it's really all about is it's really fun and exciting to do science. I found that the actual practice of building things, having them not work, trying to figure out why they didn't work, fixing them, and then making them work gave me enormous satisfaction. It was really just a lot of fun. Plus, you get to launch rockets and high-altitude balloons and see all kinds of different places around the world. That being said, we do in science try and answer some really fundamental questions. And here at NASA, our astrophysics program is trying to answer questions like, where did the universe come from? How did it first get started and start expanding as we know it did now? And the Hubble Space Telescope has a lot to do with that, as did Edwin Hubble, the person, after which the telescope is named. And as the universe started to expand and stars and galaxies started to come into existence, how did the stuff that we're made out of, the calcium that's in our bones, the iron that's in our blood, where did it come from, and how did it get incorporated into the Earth so that we could come into being and have this lecture today or this talk? But also, if we're here and there's planets out there in the galaxy and in the universe that are kind of like Earth, do they have people on them? so that students can come to lectures for their space program. But anyway, the big question is, are we alone? Now the first one, how did the universe form? We're learning a lot about that. And the Hubble, hopefully you've already studied some of that, has been teaching us a lot, as have ground-based observatories. Where did we come from? Stellar nucleosynthesis, the creation of atoms that we're made out of from inside of stars. We're understanding how all of that happened as well. Now the Hubble Space Telescope, I think you know, it's about the size of the bus that you arrived in today. So it's pretty big. And one of the reasons why it's such a great telescope is because we've had 5 missions to go upgrade the telescope. So when Charlie Bolden launched the Hubble Space Telescope in 1990, one of the things that was on board was the first digital camera, the first CCD. And it wasn't very good. If you were to go anywhere, even just like to Walmart and try and buy a camera like that, you wouldn't find one because they went out of, they stopped being made a long time ago. So now the Hubble Space Telescope has really good detectors, really good digital cameras. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story about the last mission to Hubble, and you can see I'm there on your left, second from the end. This mission was commanded by Scott Altman. He was a Navy commander, flew F-14s in the Navy. This was his 4th mission and his 2nd mission to the Hubble. He's an aerospace engineer, studied in college at the University of Illinois. Next to him, to his left, is Greg Johnson, also a naval aviator, and he studied at University of Washington in aerospace engineering. This was his first flight. Next to him is Mike Good, another aerospace engineer. We had a lot of aerospace engineers from Notre Dame. His first flight, also an Air Force officer, and he flew in bombers. Next to him, some of you may have heard of before, Mike Massimino. He's got over 1 million Twitter followers. He's Astro Mike. He was on his 2nd mission, and he had been on the previous Hubble mission with me and Scott Altman. Next to Scott Altman on the other side is Megan MacArthur. She's an oceanographer from University of San Diego, her first mission, and she was the flight engineer and also operated the robotic arm. Myself on my 5th mission, my 3rd trip to Hubble. Next to me is Drew Feustel, a geologist, actually a geophysical scientist, but a geologist from Purdue, and he was on his first flight. So we had quite a varied group of engineers and scientists going up to Hubble. We trained for a couple of years, and unfortunately, this was a mission that followed closely on the heels of the loss of Columbia. So we had 2 shuttles, Atlantis and Endeavour. We were going up on Atlantis. We had Endeavour there to rescue us in case something went wrong. So here we are marching out in our orange pumpkin suits, and those are pressure suits, mostly to make us feel better. They're there in case we have to jump out of the shuttle, which would be a pretty radical thing to do. So we had to make sure we got to the right vehicle, so that's Scott Altman checking that we're actually at Atlantis and not Endeavour. It's pretty tight getting into the shuttle, wearing a parachute and a spacesuit. That was Megan going in last. There are about 10,000 people that all have to do their job just right to get us to launch day. And that's the launch director telling us, have a good flight, and that we'd see him back in Florida in about 11 days. We didn't. We went to California. But here we are, about 6 seconds before launch, the shuttle main engines turn on. Make sure everything's running right. Then the solid rocket motors go off, and once they light, you know you're going somewhere. That's definitely a big event. And that alarm you heard is a very bad sound to hear at liftoff. That means something has gone terribly wrong. But they told us to keep going as if we had a choice, because all during this phase, the computers are flying the shuttle. But we're heading in generally the right direction, so we thought, okay, can't be too bad. After 2 minutes, the solid rocket motors run out of fuel and come off, and they had a camera on board, so you can see as we're still going to orbit, those solid rocket motors are still recording, and that bright light is the shuttle continuing onto orbit using the liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen fuel that's in the tank. 8.5 minutes later, the engines turn off, we're in orbit, we get rid of that tank, we open the payload bay doors, and all of our amazing Hubble hardware is in the payload bay as we get ready to chase down Hubble. Now that alarm was an indication that one of our flight control systems had failed. And it turns out it had failed just before launch. And the engineers that designed the shuttle were really smart, because one of the things that the commander or pilot could do if there's a problem, is flip a switch to stop the launch. However, there's a little window just before launch that if you were to stop the launch, the solid rocket motors might go anyway and start up, even though the main engines are shutting down. And that would be a very bad thing. So a big discussion ensued, and the engineers who were designing the shuttle said, okay, well, we will suppress any alarms in the 1 second before flight to make sure that nobody gets too quick and flips a switch that would result in a bad day. So then the engineer said, okay, well, if we don't tell the crew there's a problem before launch, when should we tell the crew? And somebody said, well, I guess after launch we can tell them. So we had a failure of our flight control system just before launch, but the system, the computer, didn't tell us. Then we lifted off and it said, okay, time to tell the crew. Not that it makes any difference at that point, but these engineers were really super intelligent because not only did they figure out the alarm thing, now they could have waited 5 seconds. That probably would have made us feel a little better, or 10 seconds, because there's still nothing we could do. But they decided to do it at launch. But the flight control systems are what control the engines, where they point, and where the elevons on the wings and the rudder and things like that, where they all go. So it's a really critical system. If you don't have flight control, then the shuttle isn't under control, and it'll fly out of control, literally. So they were so smart, they put in 4 flight control systems. So when one of ours failed, we still had 3 good ones, and that's why the ground said, hey, no big deal, just keep going. So we made it to orbit. That gave Scott Altman the opportunity, once we were close to Hubble, to actually take the controls of the shuttle. Charlie told you the shuttle weighs about 250,000 pounds, and so Scott Altman is flying it, like a sports car, which is what he drives, right up underneath Hubble, so that Megan MacArthur could reach out with the robotic arm and grab Hubble. Now, I mentioned when I introduced Megan MacArthur that this was her first flight, so by definition, it's also the first time she's had to grab Hubble. The Hubble is worth billions of dollars. It's the most significant scientific instrument ever created by humans. And in fact, as the robotic arm operator, she's never actually flown the arm before. Because nowadays, we train everything inside computer simulators. So training for 3 years before flight on the ground, all she ever did was fly computer games that have an arm that looks like the space shuttle. So here she is on orbit, flying the arm for the first time, and she has to grab the Hubble Space Telescope. We're both traveling at 17,500 miles an hour, the Hubble and the shuttle, 350 miles above planet Earth. And if she misses the Hubble on the first try, then Hubble's gone. That'll be the end of Hubble. So do you think she was under any pressure? Well, she was just great. She grabbed Hubble the first time, obviously, or I wouldn't be here talking to you. I'd probably be hiding somewhere. But we did grab the Hubble, and that allowed us then to get ready for spacewalking. Now, the space shuttle is pretty small inside. That's why the space station is so great, because it has all these different modules and places to go. On the space shuttle, we had 7 people. We had 4 spacesuits, which is like having 4 more people. And then we had all the supplies for doing spacewalking, all the tools we needed to repair the Hubble, and survival gear in case we had to spend 25 days in space. So you can see it's a little bit crowded here. And that's Mike Massimino and Drew Feustel. Drew is dressed for spacewalking now. He has on the suit that will help keep him cool. It's a liquid cooling garment, and to circulate air. That's what the yellow duct is, to circulate oxygen actually around his suit. And what you see is that Mike Massimino has the instruction book for how to get dressed and how to get the spacesuit ready. Almost everything we do on the space shuttle, we use checklists, and that's to make sure that we don't forget something. We also use a 2-person rule so that you have one person who's got the checklist and one person who's doing the activity so that we can back each other up. Everything we do on the shuttle is all about teamwork and backing each other up. So finally, we were dressed in our spacesuits to go spacewalking. We were in the airlock. That's where this picture was taken. And we're ready to turn the handle that's above Scott Altman's head and let all the air out of the airlock. Except for one problem. Scott Altman doesn't have a spacesuit on. And we really wanted Scott to survive because he's the guy, as Charlie has done twice, to land the space shuttle. So we kicked him out of the airlock, opened the hatch, and out we went to space. And hopefully you could see it on the previous picture, but in this picture, I'm out now working in a vacuum outside in the payload bay of the space shuttle. You can see the Earth reflected at the top of my visor. The white object behind me is the space shuttle wing with the carbon leading edge and the colorful materials in the payload bay. The gold is structure that holds the new scientific instruments. But also, hopefully, you can see that I have a big grin on my face. That big grin is what I have almost all the time in space. I just love being in space. And the best of all is to be doing a spacewalk. That spacesuit is basically a whole spaceship. It has oxygen in the backpack. It has water, which is used to keep me cool. It has radios. It even has a television camera system on my visor. It has lights, high and low beams, radios, just a great suit. And it's just a cloth suit, flexible, but filled with oxygen at 4.3 pounds per square inch. And it's just fun to be out in space. Now, it's a pretty hazardous environment. If the spacesuit gets a cut and the oxygen leaks out, it's curtains for the spacewalker. So it's a dangerous activity, so you have to pay attention, but really fun to be out there. Now, on the first day, we were going to remove the old digital camera for Hubble and put the new one in. And the other reason I was smiling is because I knew we were going to transform the Hubble Space Telescope with this new camera. Well, we got up there, and Drew Feustel is on the end of the arm, and he's holding a wrench, and he's changing part of that wrench because we got out there to do the simplest of all tasks. Go up to the old camera, put a wrench on that bolt, turn it, unscrew it, take out the old camera, put the new camera in, and shazam, the Hubble is transformed into a brand new telescope. Except when Drew went to turn the bolt, it wouldn't turn. I mean, it was really stuck. And we had to call the ground and ask for help, and we put different wrenches on it, and there was nothing we were going to do to unstick that bolt. And so when I said I'm almost always smiling in space, at this point I wasn't smiling. We'd come all this way, overcome all kinds of adversity, including the whole mission being canceled at one point. And the whole point of the mission was to get that camera in there, the #1 priority, and it looked like it wasn't going to work. And I could go into a long story about the design of that bolt and how it was designed to protect Hubble, but eventually the ground said, well, we're just going to have to go for broke, so to speak, and put a wrench on that has no torque protection at all, and just whatever strength Drew could put into it, he should try and turn it, and if the bolt head breaks off, well, that's the end of that task, and if it comes loose, then we can get the new camera in. And fortunately, we just had lots of help. You can see Megan's looking a little bit worried at this point, as was everybody on the ground. But we did have that instruction book. And most of that instruction books is not about what to do when things are going right, but it's what to do when things are going wrong. And so literally there was a page in the book that said, if bolt is stuck, then, and it had a whole series of steps that we could try one after another, working on board and also with folks on the ground. And so part of that message is when we fly space missions now, and it doesn't matter whether it was the space shuttle or whether it's a cargo mission or whether it's operating on the International Space Station, we always work as a team to try and think ahead, plan for what goes right, but think about what might go wrong and plan for that too. So you always have an out, always have some backup plan as you go into these things, because they're very complex, and the spacewalks can only last about 8 hours maximum, and then you have to come inside. So fortunately, when Drew went to turn the bolt, there was, well, I heard a noise anyway, but there was a noise because the sound of the bolt turning was communicated through Drew's spacesuit into the comm loop, and all we knew is that it turned. We didn't know whether it had broken or whether it had come loose, but fortunately, when we started turning it more, the instrument started coming out, and eventually we got the instrument out, which is why there's a big hole in Hubble now. And you can't see it in my visor, but now I'm smiling again. We put that new camera in. We put new gyros in the Hubble Space Telescope so that it could point. We put new batteries into the telescope. These aren't little AA batteries. They're 300-pound nickel hydrogen batteries. And they're amazing batteries because Hubble goes around the Earth 16 times a day, so it has 16 days and nights. And when it's in the night side of the Earth, in the shadow, it has to use those batteries. So they charge up and charge down 16 times a day. And the previous set lasted 19 years. I don't know of any other batteries that can cycle like that and last so long. Next, we took out the eyeglasses from Hubble and put in a new scientific instrument in its place. And Administrator Bolden mentioned we put eyeglasses on. Well, this instrument, the corrective optics space telescope axial replacement COSTAR, was the eyeglasses. And so you think, well, it should be really simple. You just put a couple of lenses in. Well, the Hubble's a little more complex than that, and we had to build this 800-pound instrument that had all sorts of little mirrors and lenses in it to correct the optics. But correct it they did, But now when we build new instruments, every new instrument has those eyeglasses built in, so it's a lot easier. So we took out that old corrective optics and put in a new instrument in its place. And I told Drew Feustel he had to go to the gym every day for 3 years lifting weights so that he could lift this 800-pound instrument. But of course, in space, everything floats. So he didn't have to be so strong to lift the instrument. But he did have to be strong to work in the spacesuit, because the spacesuit, being just an inflated bladder of cloth, wants to be out like this. And you have to work in here and move your arms and your hands. And every time you have to move, you're doing work against the spacesuit. And so to be in space and to do spacewalks, you have to be really fit. And I think that message applies on Earth too. It's really important to stay fit, because that means you're more healthy and you're capable of doing more things. This is an image from one of the cameras on Drew's head opening up the doors of Hubble. Hubble was designed to be serviced, and so it actually has doors that we can open. Here he's taking out that heavy instrument. You can see even lets go for a moment and gives a thumbs up. He did that because every time in training we tried to remove that instrument, it got stuck. And so he was just really happy that on orbit it came out okay. We also tried something really hard that a lot of people said couldn't be done. We opened up an instrument inside of the Hubble, taking out lots of tiny screws, really tiny screws, pulled circuit cards out and put new circuit cards in to recover one of the other instruments in the Hubble. And so how do you take screws out in space, tiny screws? With a tiny screwdriver. And so I'm loosening the screws there, but you don't want the screws floating around. So we put this contraption on top and then used a power drill to remove them all the way. And that contraption, you may be able to see some screws floating around, was to hold the screws in place when I removed the cover plate. Next, just reach in and pull out the circuit cards, right? Except the sides of the circuit cards are razor sharp, and I don't want to cut my gloves, so we invented another tool to pull the circuit cards out, and we were able to repair that instrument. And so one of the things we get to do on Hubble missions, and anytime we're working on a space mission, is invent lots of new tools. And that's one of those fun parts where you get to invent something, build it, and then try it out for real. So we finished that task. Here we are floating over the Baja Peninsula and the coast of Mexico, traveling 5 miles a second over the Earth as we repair the Hubble. So coming in from that spacewalk where we tried this really hard thing that worked and repaired the new optics, I was pretty happy. There you see that grin again. And when I first came back from the mission, I was so happy about this particular activity that when I briefed it at our all hands, I said, this was the happiest moment of my life. And then I looked out in the audience, and there was my wife and my 2 kids. And I said, oops, let me correct. It's the 4th happiest moment of my life. Because we were successful on that, we tried the next day to do another repair inside the telescope. And this time, removing 130 tiny screws. But first, we had to remove a handrail. And that yellow object is a handrail that we're trying to pull off, and the screws were stripped. And so now we were totally out of luck. We couldn't open up the instrument to pull cards out. So finally, after 4 hours, the ground said, just try and rip it off.
Disposal bag, please.
Now, it took about 60 pounds of force to remove that handrail. And I asked Mike Massimino, do you think you can do that? And he said, oh yeah, at this point I could probably do anything. And so it's just one of those amazing things that after all the tools we built, after all the trials, and we didn't have a backup plan that said pull the handrail off, but while we were doing the spacewalks, while Mike Massimino and Mike Good were out doing their spacewalk, folks on the ground actually built a mock-up of the handrail and tried breaking it off. So they have a scale there to measure the force. So they did that, and then they called up and said, hey, we think you can break the handrail off over the radio loop. And even better, they didn't show us that video, because I'm sure somebody would have said, hey, that doesn't look safe. So with that, on the last day, we changed out some other instruments on Hubble, put on some new installation, and then it was time to close everything up and come back inside. That's me on the end of the robotic arm, looking out at the Earth, looking at the shuttle. Really just an amazing thing we got to do. Then Megan grabbed the Hubble again, put it on the end of the arm, and we let go of Hubble and sent it off to space so that it's working now and you could study it and learn from the lessons. Now, once we got rid of the Hubble, we still didn't know whether it would work or not, but our job was done. We were able to all get together for a meal, and so this is a lunch on the space shuttle. I like to hang upside down like a bat when I eat, because you can do that in space. Next is a lesson on how to make a chicken sandwich in space. We eat tortillas because bread makes lots of crumbs. And so tortillas don't make a lot of crumbs because otherwise it's like a snowstorm when you make a sandwich. So there you go. I encourage you all to try that at home. Let go of the spoon, let go of the tortilla. I think you know what the result will be. Drew, my son asked me to take a picture of a ball of water. And so Drew and I did that. And I noticed that a ball of water floating in space makes a sphere, which is a good lens. And convex lenses, invert the image. So I focused on Drew. His nose really isn't that big in the image. And then I said, get really close, because lenses also magnify. So that's actually a magnified view of the inside of Drew's eye from a ball of water floating in space. So that's the kind of fun stuff we get to do on orbit. We had a couple of days for bad weather that we stayed in space, so we fed the fish. Those are peanut M&Ms. That's actually Tang for real. They gave us Tang on orbit, which we learned about from the Apollo astronauts. And that's also a ball of water, so you can see it's dynamic, well, up until Mike drank it. We also did physics experiments. This is the stability of rotation of solid objects about various axes. If you've taken AP physics, you know all about this, and conservation of angular momentum. Now, while we were down doing hard work, the rest of the crew was up on the flight deck playing video games. So here's Scott Altman playing the Land the Space Shuttle video game. Actually, I was filming this, and I said, oh, I don't think I got it. Can you film it again? And he'd practice again, and he'd practice again. I just wanted him to practice a lot so we'd be ready. And it actually is a good simulator of how the space shuttle lands. Because he's been in space with the rest of us for 12 days, so he hasn't practiced landing. So finally they told us the weather in Florida is too bad, go to California. Scott got back in his spacesuit, put on some California music. And Megan said, get back to work. And so thousands of miles from California, we did our deorbit burn. And then after that, we're a glider for 5,000 miles, using the bottom of the space shuttle to hit the atmosphere and slow us down, which causes us to glow like a meteorite coming into the atmosphere. A few hundred miles from California, we picked up the coast, we picked up the runway, and turned to land on runway 22 at Edwards Air Force Base. This is a view through the pilot's window. It shows us going over 300 miles an hour at about 11,000 feet. Remember, we're just a glider, so we get one chance at this. At about 300 feet, we put the landing gear down. Otherwise, we crash and burn. So that comes down. And then Scott Altman very gently put us down on the runway, just 200 feet wide, 15,000 feet long, after traveling around the Earth 197 times, 5.8 million miles, doing 5 spacewalks, grabbing the Hubble, deploying the Hubble, put out a parachute so the nose doesn't hit too hard, apply the brakes, and roll to a stop. Of course, the big question then is, did Hubble work? Did we fix the Hubble or did we break the Hubble? I think all of you know we fixed the Hubble. And so here's some of the images that have come out of Hubble. In fact, in the upper left is the newest image, anniversary image, and it's just fun to say, but it's called the Monkey Head Nebula. So I don't know if any of you can see a monkey head in there, but apparently there is. And it's shown in various colors, because in this new camera, we added the infrared capability. Now, Superman had X-ray vision, so he could see through stuff. Well, in the cosmos, X-rays actually get blocked by gas and dust, but infrared light can sneak through gas and dust. So we can see inside of these regions baby stars being born, and actually even miniature planetary systems being born. And so we're learning about how the Earth came into being, how new stars come into being, and that cycle of life about where are the chemical elements. We also study galaxies. This is a picture of a galaxy with lots of new stars being born. And this M83 is also part of a citizen science program. So you can go online and do Hubble science, even in middle school and high school. As part of studying galaxies, we're actually studying the galaxies in the whole universe. It turns out there's about 200 billion galaxies in the universe. The universe is about 13.72 billion years old. And Hubble is able to look out into that ancient past to see some of the very first galaxies in the universe and study everything in between. We also study planets in our solar system with Hubble and other observatories. We have lots. We have 2 rovers on the surface of Mars. We look at Jupiter. In fact, recently we looked at the moon Europa around Jupiter with the Hubble Space Telescope and saw these interesting signals that maybe a water geyser is coming out of the South Pole. And Europa is a planet that has a rocky core, a mantle, and then a thick, salty ocean covered with ice. And any time in the solar system we have, or any time on Earth that we have water, energy, and organics, we have life. So a big question is, do you think there's life in the ice in the ocean on Europa? So we're going to try and figure that out with a future mission that we're working on here at NASA. When I was 6 or 7, I wanted to be an astronaut. I never thought it was all that realistic, but I loved science, so I studied science. And I loved doing science. I loved working in the field. I liked launching payloads into orbit. And eventually, I figured I wanted to go. I applied when I got my PhD in physics. And basically, I sent in the application to NASA, never thought I'd hear again. And I was lucky to be asked for an interview once, and they said, hey, great interview, great application, but not this time. I applied again, and then I got into the Corps. But there are lots of amazing jobs at NASA, working in laboratories, doing astrobiology, trying to figure out how life started on Earth so that maybe we can see if life exists elsewhere. Working on airplanes, doing earth science. One of the things we do know is the climate is changing. In fact, the climate has always been changing. Now the change is accelerating, probably due to greenhouse gases we're putting in the atmosphere. We fly high-altitude aircraft with science instruments on board. We build payloads that go to Mars. We work on planetary atmospheres in the laboratory. And we send people to Antarctica to study ice and fly airplanes over Antarctica, as well as building satellites. And that other picture on your left is a picture of me at 20 years old, getting ready to launch a payload in Japan to study the sun. So there's lots of interesting jobs doing science, going out into the field, and this is the part that really caused me to fall in love with science, was going to exotic places to do science and having a lot of fun doing it. Here are people working on future Mars rovers. One of the things that we're working on that we're really thrilled about is the next Hubble, so to speak, Hubble 2.0, and it's called the James Webb Space Telescope. And it's an infrared telescope. It's going to launch in 2018. And so if you're interested in astronomy, this is the telescope you're probably going to use. And Amber is working on it, and it's going great. It's going to be able to do some incredible things, looking at the first galaxies, the birth of planets, the origin of perhaps life. We're going to study planets around nearby stars and maybe look to see if anybody's home. So with that, we have lots of cool things that you can go to for social networking, worldwideweb.nasa.gov/connect. Go to Webb Telescope, hubblesite.org, and if you really have too much free time, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm called SciAstro. So with that, I just want to say that the Hubble story, since Hubble was just repaired in 2009, is really just beginning. I think the biggest discovery out of Hubble is one that maybe some of you might make using the Hubble Space Telescope, and there's some more websites for you. So now I think I'm up to answer questions for whatever time we have left. Thank you. Okay, questions? Oh, okay, I'll get you next.
I'm Morgan Courtwright from West Green High School. What mental and physical training do you have to go through in order to go up to space?
The training to be, once you're an astronaut, when you first get into astronaut school, basically, you're an astronaut candidate, and you spend 1 to 2 years just learning the basics. And it's like going back to college, because maybe you're like Drew Feustel, a geologist. But you have to learn some electrical engineering, some mechanical engineering, and many other different fields to have all the basic knowledge you need to be able to go up into space. You also may have to learn Russian. How many of you speak Russian? Yeah, so it's something that, if we the space program is a very international program, and right now the International Space Station, going up on the Soyuz rocket, we have to learn Russian as well. And so it's like going back to school. Once you get assigned to a specific mission, then it's like going to graduate school, because you have to start working on those very specific things that you're going to do on your own mission, and all of the things that you might have to do if things go wrong. So spacewalks to repair something. And so it's a mental exercise in studying a lot, but then also physical, because to do the spacewalks, to have strong muscles and bones to work in space, you have to go to the workout in the gym. Once you get to orbit, it's great because you have 2 hours a day to work out in the gym. It's really hard to find 2 hours a day while you're also learning and doing all the other things that you need to do to squirrel that away. So very important to work out every day. And then there's a lot of travel because we have an international space station. You spend a lot of time going to either Europe or Japan or Russia, Canada to train on the robotic arm. So it's really a lot of fun because every day is something different. But it's also a big challenge because you have to be able to switch gears quickly. Of course, all of you are experienced in that because going to high school, in your first period you might have math, then you have social studies, then you have English, maybe world history, and then chemistry. Every 40 minutes you have to switch gears, and it's like that being an astronaut too. Over here.
I'm Ben Boone from Mapletown Junior Senior High School. What early life experiences have you faced that contributed to overcoming the challenges of working with people of different origins?
I grew up in Chicago. It's a small town in the Midwest. And one of the great things about Chicago is it's very multinational. And so in my elementary school and middle school and high school, there were already people from many different cultures, most of whom were not themselves from another country, for instance, or another culture, but whose parents were. And so for me, growing up on the south side of Chicago, a lot of things that some folks might think, was out of normal, being with different people, was totally normal for me. So I think just growing up in a big city was a big part of that. Once I became an astronaut, my astronaut class was a very international class. We had astronauts from the European Space Agency, from the Canadian Space Agency, from the Japanese Space Agency, and so very quickly we just got to know each other really well, and because we were training with each other, going to the gym with each other, flying with each other, that experience showed that really people aren't all that much different no matter where they come from. Other questions? Down here.
Hi, my name's Bailey Frodella from Margaret Bell Miller Middle School in Waynesburg, PA. What was your team's first thoughts after accomplishing and fixing the Hubble Space Telescope?
So once we had come in after the last spacewalk and had finished all of our work, in fact, we sort of had a motto, do your job and a little bit more. And so when we were training, we were always trying to do our job and do a little bit more extra. And I try and do that in everything in life. When we went up to space, we had just all kinds of things we had to finish on the Hubble. And we knew this was the last mission. We carried a little bit extra hardware in case we had time, but none of us thought we would actually use it. We carried some insulation to go on the outside of the telescope so that it would have a longer life. But we had so many tasks, like the repair of the camera where we had to pull the circuit cards out, or the one where eventually we had to break the handrail off, and other things, where we thought, if anything goes wrong, we're not going to have enough time to do the extra. We should be satisfied with just doing what we were asked to do. And even that would be great. But by the end of the mission, we had enough time to do that one piece of extra insulation that we didn't think we were going to get to. So we felt pretty good that we'd done our job and a little bit more. However, we didn't know whether we'd fixed the telescope or broken the telescope, because even though everything had gone just right, this is very complex, putting in these new instruments and circuit cards. So we didn't know whether it would all work or not. So that was still a big mystery for us. But a few months after flight, when they had the first light, they turned on the telescope and we saw the first images. We were just really glad we didn't break the telescope.
Hi, John. My name is Dylan Scritchfield from Margaret Bell Miller Middle School in Waynesburg, PA. And my question to you is, how long does it take to plan a space mission, as in like Hubble?
Most space missions to the International Space Station are somewhat similar to the one before it, and we've flown about 35 different expeditions. So for that, for the astronaut crew, for the very specific mission, it just takes a couple of years now. For the space shuttle missions that would go and assemble the space station, about a full year. For Hubble, which tends to be a little more complex, we had spent 2 to 3 years planning for the mission and preparing for it. But even before, as astronauts, we got involved for those 2 or 3 years, the folks in the engineering group on the ground might have been planning for 8 or 9 years. It takes about that long to design a new instrument, get the funding, work out all the details as far as how it will all come together, start procuring parts, building the instruments, checking them all out on the ground, verifying they'll survive the launch, and then finally getting manifested to go up on the space shuttle. So for the big team, it takes many, many years. For the astronaut team, it was about 3 years to start the training and the preparation. Seems like a long time, but it goes quick when you're actually doing it. Other questions?
My name is Randy Durr from Mapletown High School. My question to you is, how did NASA support the team, as specifically to the astronauts, after Hubble was launched and then discovered that it was not working to its full potential?
So when Administrator Bolden deployed, the crew deployed the telescope, everyone on the ground thought everything went perfectly. I mean, the solar array they overcame, we saw the first images, and they were really good images. Compared to a ground-based telescope, people were really happy. But the folks that helped design the telescope and the instruments knew what it should have done, and so when they saw this little bit of halo around the stars, if you go out at night and you squint, you can kind of see, a halo around the stars, and that's because your eyelids and everything get in the way. But when Hubble, they saw that, they said, it wasn't supposed to be that way. And there were a lot of people who were just incredibly disappointed. In fact, even the American public and the Congress were scratching their heads saying, how could NASA screw up so badly? Quite honestly. This was a multi-billion-dollar telescope, a space shuttle launch. People had been working on it for about 10 years to build the telescope, and somebody missed that the mirror was ground to slightly the wrong prescription. Those of you who wear contacts or glasses know you have to get a prescription. That's the instructions on how to grind the lenses. In the case of Hubble, it's a mirror, and the mirror was the most perfect mirror that anybody had ever made. It just was made to the wrong shape. Now, you might think somebody should have figured that out pretty quickly, but to give you a sense, the correct shape and the one that it was ground to differed only by about the width of a human hair at the far edge. But that was enough to make the images just slightly blurry. And fortunately, NASA loves a challenge. People at NASA love a challenge. In fact, my belief is that our great employees, engineers, scientists, technicians, everybody performs at a much higher level when they're challenged at a higher level. You give them something boring to do, they'll do it fine, but it's not going to be the most creative work. If you challenge them with something really hard, then you get the most out of people. And I find that generally true. So when the spherical aberration occurred and people realized what it was, immediately the creative people started thinking, okay, how can we fix it? And what's really great is that the NASA management didn't say, hey, you guys screwed up, you messed up the telescope, we're not going to give you any support. The management said, if you really think you can fix it, we're behind you. We will support you, we'll find the money, we'll get it done. And that's what happened. And so we were able to fix the Hubble Space Telescope, the first servicing mission when the crew went out in the spacewalks. And in fact, that big refrigerator-sized object you saw Drew Feustel taking out, that's what they invented. They invented that and they put it in the telescope in 1993. Now that was really important for two reasons. One, if we hadn't fixed the Hubble, we wouldn't have all this great knowledge about black holes, about the age of the universe, about the birthplace of stars, the furthest galaxies we've ever seen, all that kind of amazing stuff. Asteroids hitting Jupiter. So that would be bad. But also, there was a belief that if NASA couldn't fix Hubble, then how would we ever expect to build a space station or go to Mars? And I think if we'd failed to fix Hubble, we probably wouldn't have the International Space Station, we wouldn't be planning to go to Mars, so some of you wouldn't get to go to Mars. So NASA was really very supportive and gave the engineers the freedom to think out of the box, to be creative, and to solve those challenges. How many of you would like to go to space? How about Mars? It's a long way, at least 2 years. How about the moon? Other questions? Well, you have a great opportunity this afternoon to go out to the Goddard Space Flight Center. That's one of the places I've spent a lot of time, years, training for the Hubble. And hopefully you'll get a chance to see the James Webb Space Telescope as it's being built. So you won't actually be able to go into the clean room where they're building it because it has to be super, super clean. To give you an example, the Hubble has a 2.4 meter mirror. Turns out that's not that big. It is big, but it's not that big because we're building a 6.5 meter optic for the James Webb Space Telescope. Each one of, there's 18 segments that are about 1.5 meters across, the hexagonal segments. If you were to stretch one of those segments to the size of the United States, okay, who knows what the highest peak in Pennsylvania is? Do you know about how high it is? It's about 4,000 feet tall. If we were to stretch one of the James Webb Space Telescope mirrors, and you'll see where they are today, to the size of the United States, the biggest mountain would be about 10 inches tall. That's how smooth they are. Just amazing. All right, thanks very much. Have a great tour this afternoon. Thanks for coming to NASA headquarters. And for all of you who couldn't make it here at NASA headquarters but listen from Pennsylvania, I couldn't see your hands when I asked about Mars or the Moon, so you'll have to tell your friends here how many of you want to go to Mars or the Moon. So thanks very much.
We're so glad you all could join us today here at NASA headquarters, and you have a great rest of the day planned for you, so have a great time out at Goddard. I work at Goddard. I'm here at headquarters temporarily, but it's amazing there. You guys are going to be so excited to see the pieces of this amazing James Webb Space Telescope that are coming together right now at Goddard. It's a really exciting time here at NASA. We get to do some of the most amazing things in the world. It's fun, exciting work, and I hope you've enjoyed your time here this morning and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much.